Sure.
So good afternoon again, everybody. Welcome to our next restoration seminar. And today, I'm really glad to have with us Nikkia Greene and David Shanight. They're both from the Environmental Protection Agency from Helena. And we actually talked about their introduction, and we agreed on that they will introduce themselves. And probably that would be much better than my reading of it. So welcome, everybody.
All right.
And
thank you. Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nikkia Greene. I'm a remedial project manager for the Environmental Protection Agency. I've been with EPA now for 6 years. I've 3 of those years I've been a remedial project manager for the Butte Priority Soils, Butte Mine Flooding site, the Rocker site just down the road, and the Montana Pole Treatment Plant site. I have about 22 years of construction experience, construction management, design. I actually own my own equipment and dozer, and that's kind of how I got through school. Non-traditional student. I went back to school when I was 31. I actually just graduated in 2012. But I have a young family, a daughter that just graduated, and a vibrant young 12-year-old son. But you know, I grew up in Montana, grew up in Townsend, and from a small town. Worked construction my whole life and decided, hey, I kind of want to get out of this. Had 2 back surgeries because of running scrapers and dozers, and decided to put someone in the field. You know, reading some of the engineers' stuff on paper didn't make sense to me then, and some of it still doesn't make sense to me now. But so that's a little bit of my background.
Well, my name is David Shanight. I don't actually work for the Environmental Protection Agency. I'm a contractor to the Environmental Protection Agency. I work for a company called CDM Smith out of Helena, Montana. I've been working with EPA for the last 17 years, mostly on abandoned mine sites. I've spent many years, started as an intern for my company when I was going to MSU, working out at the Anaconda site, and then transitioned into working for EPA in the Butte site about 15 years ago. I've got a lot of experience in more abandoned mine sites, historic mine sites, for instance, Upper 10 Mile Creek watershed, Basin Creek watershed mine sites, and got to wear a lot of different hats over the years. And one of kind of my specialties is mine site reclamation, small reclamation projects. You know, Butte has a lot of small mine sites, and those are the ones we're talking about. It's not big active mine sites, it's more of the abandoned ones from the turn of the century.
No. So today we're mainly going to be talking about the Butte Reclamation Evaluation System. There'll be bits and pieces of, you know, restoration and remedy interaction. Now, a lot for the Butte Priority Soils operable unit, you know, there hasn't been a lot of that interaction. You know, most of the interaction has been, you know, working with the tree pods program, the native plant program from the tech here and through Butte Silverbow, and, you know, kind of interacting with hey, we got to do some remedy here. Let's add an additional 4 feet of soil so this tree pod will thrive. So it's been that kind of interaction throughout the hill, you know, on the trails, you know, certain areas of, you know, if neighbors wanted the flowers or trees or stuff like that. So there's not an extensive amount of the restoration interaction with remedy through this particular site. Now, you know, you go downstream through streamside tailings in different areas like that. There's been, you know, Milltown Dam. There's been a extensive coordination with restoration and remedy. And so, in part, you know, as we go through this presentation, and David's really, you know, been with a part of the BRES program since its inception, and so I just want to emphasize that program to me is a working program, working tool that is revolving, and it's receiving input and improvements, you know, year to year. And so this is also not only a presentation, but this is also, you know, feedback from you as students, feedback from faculty, and I see a lot of familiar faces. But you know, how can EPA coordinate better with programs, with restoration programs, with the tech, with experts in the community to be inclusive to updating this tool that we've developed under Remedy.
And just to add real quick, this presentation is the slide deck that's been used probably 50 times over the last 10 years. There's going to be a lot of changes to this program, but this is kind of the foundation level. This is where we start. This describes the methodology that we use to observe and evaluate the reclaimed mine sites on the hill. This has also been adapted in other sites for more of an upland, forested type of mine sites. I guess the mine sites up in the mountains and all that. So this program is evolving, and currently is probably going through some of its biggest changes in the right now. It's so what we have today. It would be fun to come back in a year or so and say here are the improvements that have been made.
I think you're all familiar with the pit. This is just giving us a location. Western part of Montana. Just the boundary of Butte priority soils. There is some mine flooding there. You can see where the Berkeley pit is. So that's the other operable unit that I also manage under Superfund.
I think the importance of this slide is just to show all the roads and all that. That this is the evaluation system that is tailored for urban upland environment. These mine sites are right in this community. They're right here, and it's important to note that, you know, we've got a lot of different factors going on here. These are in people's backyards. People are riding their bikes around them. They're living with these sites. So
what's the Metro storm drain?
I'm joking.
The Upper Silver Bowl Creek.
Upper Silver Bowl Creek.
I just want to hear you say it.
What was that? Okay.
Wanted to hear you say it. So you can see, basically we're looking like we're coming from Helena here. Continental Divide. You can see in the yellow, you know, the old Silver Bowl Creek tributaries and how they've been taken out of the system from not only the historic mining, open pit mining in Berkeley pit, but also the current mining at the Continental pit. So Butte has a legacy of mining, beginning in the 1860s, significant to the copper industry. You know, I think everyone knows they're basically laid the line for communications, copper wire. Estimated 12 million cubic yards of waste over 5 square miles of urban area. So we started to be involved here 1987. You can see some kids here playing in the mine waste. You know, that was our initial concern. You come in here and we did a risk assessment. We needed to do some initial removals because we knew there was mine waste and there were kids playing in it, and so we did some initial removals. Risk reduction since the 1980s. The primary risk reduction techniques involved capping of waste. Over 400 acres of mine impacted land have been reclaimed under federal and state programs. You know, and that number has grown. You know, and today, you know, I can say that, you know, there's 35 plus more sites that we're looking at. You know, not necessarily new sites, but we're going back because there were some sites that were capped before this BRES program came into place, right? So we got some standards under the BRES that we've developed that maintain the protectiveness. Well, the initial sites didn't have that thorough of evaluation. We didn't have the standards that the BRES has today. So we're going back and taking a look at those, making sure that they're up to par and protective, and looking at other sites that we didn't necessarily look at.
Yeah, and you know, Butte, Anaconda, kind of this whole Clark Fork corridor, you know, reclamation standards were developed, you know, back in the early 80s, and they've been evolving ever since. So that we're talking about, you know, almost 40 years worth of reclamation. Things have definitely changed. Things are always evolving. There's new science and research. There's people studying the performance of these older caps. For instance, before this was a Superfund site, there were some, I'm not sure if it was Department of State Lands or what program it was under in the 80s. They were doing some risk reduction. They were using different techniques than what we use today. For instance, there are some of their sites that they weren't totally in touch with, like, what's the right composition of soil to use, what's the right seed mix to place over these mine wastes that have been regraded. So things are always evolving, and I'm certain that things are going to change. You know, they're changing right now, but they're going to change 10 years from now and 20 years from now. So it's a process. The school has, you know, been dedicated, along with the other universities here, trying to figure out what the best program was. The decision of capping waste and left in place, that was a decision by people that we work with before us to do that. What we're talking about here today is taking the decisions that have been made and applying that to the remedy that's in place. So, you know, the primary risk reduction at this time, and what we're going to be talking about is taking a look at the methodology that we use to evaluate cover soil caps that are left in place.
Just before and after, Colorado tailings, you know, massive transformation.
In this situation, there's a lot of it pulled out of the floodplain, and it would imported soil, relining of Silverbow Creek. But these are, you know, if you look at some of the aerial photos, and I think everybody's seen them, what this place used to look like, you know, 40 years ago and where today, there's been clearly a transformation to get to, you know, from the left-hand side to the right-hand side.
So some of the techniques, regrading and application, cover soil cap, mine waste. You can see the difference here at the Lexington, and you know, even today, we're actually right now Lexington's up at the top there, right before you get into Walkerville, and we're actually within the local vicinity of the mine, you know, inside the fence, and outside we're actually doing work there right now.
And the idea, just going back to the other photo, the idea of the regrading was just to, giving us an opportunity to put cover sill on so it's not continuously eroding down the hill, and then applying a cover soil cap to hold that waste down. And those are angle proposed types of slopes, and even if that was a clean material, it would be continuously eroding. So there are specifications that have been developed, I would say in the last 10 years, or kind of been finalized, called the Butte Hill revegetation specifications, that comes up with maximum slopes, the type of cover soil that's used, and probably the biggest change that we're going through right now is with the seed mixes that we apply to these sites. Through research and just monitoring sites, not just in Butte, but across the Pacific Northwest. There's definitely rooms to enhance and improve. And so one major component or major change that we're going to be working through in the next year, I think there's going to be a big push to really look at what the cover soil seed mix is.
And for example, Professor Powell actually developed a native seed mix that we approved last summer.
It was in the qualification. They named after me, I don't know why. I hope it's not a bad plan.
So, super fun. We've addressed 8 million cubic yards of waste. These are some of the initial removals. And the equipment that was used, more than 30 million spent for reclamation. Vegetation cover caps are, they're an integral part of the remedy, from stormwater run-on, run-off to controlling the exposure pathway for human health. So this success is critical. We got to maintain the integrity of the caps, so we don't see that extensive erosion. So we don't see. So we try to limit the amount of sediment entering the stormwater system, and that's essential to protecting Blacktail Creek, Silverbow Creek, to control that sediment that's on the hill, and not to mention, from Walkerville down to, down to the visitor center, a lot of that we're looking at 11% grade. I mean, we're talking about a steep slope in the middle of an urban area that's full of mine waste.
And going back to the last bullet, when this methodology was developed, it was developed in 2000, and there was a lot of confusion on what people thought success were. Everybody would say, that site's okay. Well, no, I think it's terrible. Okay, I think it's okay. So the EPA, DEQ, Butte Silverbow, along with ARCO, they put us in a room and said, all right, go figure out where you're different, what's good and what's bad. How do you determine what is working? And it's very challenging, because there's people that are very into controlling erosion. There's other experts that will be very into vegetation. There's other people that are worried about the protectiveness, human health, the protectiveness, protection of human health and the environment. So the one thing here is that this methodology, which is kind of the starting point, was developed with a group of professionals from all different kind of agencies or groups. It was integral to hear each other out, understand what's bothering you with this site, and what this did is by working together, you come up with methodology that you can all kind of agree on, and it works to meet the objectives of maintaining cover soil caps.
So what is it?
So the current methodology is, the idea was to have some objective decision-making tool to evaluate the performance of the site, and whether this site and with the end goal of making sure that these sites remain protected of human health and the environment. And knowing that there's waste underneath these caps, how do we keep that waste from moving, eroding away from the site? So the goal was, once upon a time, leave it in place, cover it with a cap that's protective, make sure that cap does not change to a point where the waste is exposed or there's some type of an exposure pathway. So the BRIS is a methodology. It's to come up with evaluation procedures, so where we all can go out to the site, we understand the methodology, and come up with kind of the same answers. And that the BRIS is made mostly for upland vegetative sites, so it's not like the sites right around in a floodplain. There's other procedures or other discussions that need to go by. So these are the upland environment sites, kind of dryland, native or dryland grasses, not native, excuse me. And that's what the BRIS system is. That's kind of the goal. So when the program was developed, we wanted to use as many standards or vegetation or soil erosion not standard methodologies, and kind of package them up into looking at the site at a whole. Because there's so many sites, there's limited budgets, we wanted to optimize the program. We didn't really want to do some big science projects. We wanted to be able to get in, get out with kind of minimal staff, give them the right training, and get in and get out of the sites. Also, just because budgets are low, we didn't want to have a lot of equipment, but really there isn't a ton of equipment required to evaluate a site. Really a clipboard, and nowadays we don't even use clipboards, but they use iPads to document all the information and make more cost-saving measures. So, and also this methodology had to be reproducible. So there was a calibration validation period where once you are trained to execute this methodology, that it could be reproducible. And there's certain steps there to ensure that it's reproducible if you're a trained evaluator. One big thing that the county wanted to do is, because of the limited resources, they wanted to use all of the information available for the site. So if there's historic soil information, if there's as-built, if there's other ideas that are other things that have been done at the site, let's use lessons learned and kind of just make this a learning process where you're using historic data so you're not redoing the same thing. Also, as I mentioned before, develop from input to other stakeholders. So one important kind of hierarchy of this program is that there's kind of two groups, and each individual members may wear two hats, so there may be somebody on the technical group along in the management group. And I see one in the room. I see Julia. She kind of probably wears two hats when she's applying the BRIS across the site. So the idea is that you have a team that goes out and collects information. What they do is report the data there, and they provide some recommendations. But then they take that information, bring it up to the management group. The management group would be considered DEQ, would be considered EPA, with the managers at Butte along with ARCO. And then they make some decisions. And the importance of the management group, one, I mean, this is kind of an extreme case, is let's say there's a cap that needs some repairs or maintenance, or maybe extensive maintenance, but there's a plan to redevelop that site. So is it worth spending that money right now to fix a site that maybe in 2 years is going to have a development? And the answer, I think, is common sense, is that because of limited resources, you don't want to spend resources on a site that's going to be repaired or new type of land use. So that's kind of an extreme example, but the managers do make the decisions. They may see the trends that the technical team that collects the data do not see.
Right. And I just want to, emphasize David's point about wearing two hats, and so I really view, the management group is not just EPA and DEQ. I see, like Mr. Robert Powell, you know, the expertise of others that you know, Norm, the expertise of vegetation and tree planting, you know, that to me combines with that management decision. It's not just made, you know, by the agencies.
So now we're just going to kind of get into the heart of the methodology, and this is more just talking specifics, and this is where the kind of where the BRIS methodology stands today. It's definitely evolving, and like I said, maybe in a year from now we can show some of the optimization techniques that we've added to the site. So kind of the pointer.
Yep.
For this one. So a part of the BRIS activities and schedule is this, and this is changing and evolving also. But in theory, there's, you know, we kind of look at it on an annual cycle. So in the wintertime, before the field, before peak biomass season, there's always a plan that goes into getting ready for the program. There's meetings, there's just talking with contractors, hiring field teams, but there's also an opportunity during that preseason to do your homework, get involved with coming up with a plan for the site, and that's the best use of time is in the winter months, right prior to the peak biomass season, which is, I think, changing in the southwestern Montana. We have an annual training event, and now that we've seen that it's the same people coming back on an annual basis to do the evaluations, they're now becoming the experts for executing the methodology. So they have a refresher date just to make sure everybody understands the methodology, understands what's in the document, understands, are able to make some reproducible measurements in the field. And that takes place in the early summer. In the last couple years, that's been in about the June timeframe. Right after that, it's usually like 2 days of training. They jump right into the field evaluations. The field evaluations take place. They look at Butte Silver Bow with help from CFWEB, look at about a quarter of the acreage approximately on an annual basis, so that it's not just every year they go out and look at each one of the sites. So in theory, a site gets visited or evaluated every 4 years. So after the field evaluations come in, the data is rolling in, and nowadays it's so much easier because it's now coming in via, iPad, cellular technology. The data comes into data reports. They provide a summary, and then eventually they come up with if there's any other data gaps that are necessary to collect. Let's say you need to go collect some soil samples, or there's some other piece of data that's missing from this puzzle, or an extra piece that's missing from the puzzle, that would be an opportunity to collect it. But what I believe and what I've observed in the last couple of years is that we're kind of getting what the problems are. So you don't necessarily always have to get out there and collect additional data. You sometimes can take lessons learned from past years and apply it forward. So there's not a lot of mystery out here in taking care of these issues. The most important thing is just following the schedule and getting onto it. And then after, if any data gaps are needed, they get rolled into a recommendations report, and what they call those are corrective action plans. And it's essentially a plan to address any specific issues at a site, and that's at a quarter of the sites per year. So after a site gets evaluated in, let's say, year one, in theory they get addressed, or any problems are addressed in year two. So, and then it rests on year three, and then reevaluated on 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. About that schedule, excuse me. So preseason evaluations. This doesn't have to be done as much anymore, especially since we have the iPad technology with air photos. Just on the move, you can see where you're at. But you're looking for areas, and you can see this from the iPad. It's so nice to have the bird's eye view right there. You can see these different things that are out at the sites. This is probably bedrock right here, but you can see it. And if you're just a person standing over here, you know that you could walk over there and say, hey, what's going on different over here? This is just one tool that they used to look at things in the field. This can be done in the office. However, I think it's really moving towards doing it on the fly in the field.
David, could you go back?
Absolutely.
I just wanted to touch on take the opportunity to touch on the schedule and a little bit about, so starting back in 2007, 2008, we started this system, and it ended up falling a little bit behind,
right,
throughout the years, and so we have other tools in place that evaluate the protectiveness of the remedy as well, like the 5-year review. So the current 5-year review, one of the recommendations that came out of it for Butte priority soils is for some timely reports following this schedule for the BRES program, and that was looking at some data for the past 5 years. So it's important to me to point that out because this is revolving, it's being improved. This Butte Silverbow has invested in this new GIS system, and we're developing the database, and it's making things way more efficient. And I can report that we have received the summary report. And now it's in our hands for the 2016 evaluations. We supply the comments with DEQ, and then we start to develop the corrective action plans.
So one activity, if you have a larger site, is kind of coming up, dividing the unit or the site into smaller land units, which we call polygons. And here's some extreme cases just to show why we may use polygons, because there's 2 different types of vegetation growing here, two different eras of reclamation. So you got to have a program that it's hard to come up with an average for both of these polygons, these land units, and come up with like kind of one average score. So what they do is in some cases, they're allowed to break up the site into smaller land units so that you could come up with a vegetation score for this side and also from this side. And lots of times the polygons are there because of the aspect, because of the slope, because of the era of reclamation. There's a lot of different reasons why, or different types of land use. So these smaller sites, in these smaller land units or polygons, really help improve the precision or the reproducibility of getting a result for each one of the units. And really, in theory, we try to lump sites, polygons. This one would probably not be lumped, but if you get one that's kind of in the gray area, the idea is kind of lumped just because it's so much data out there. There's so many sites. There could be potentially so many polygons. So when we were out there developing the BRIS program, these were the things that people brought to the table and said, I have an issue with. Hey, these are the things that make sites different, or to a point where people were differing in agreement. Well, I don't think there's enough vegetation. Okay, well, let's measure vegetation in a bad site, and let's measure a good site. Figure out what those numbers are just from looking at the site and coming up with a standard. So vegetation is probably one of the biggest ones, and that's under the ground cover, because ground cover also includes bare ground, includes soil, includes rock, includes last year's vegetation, includes live vegetation, noxious weeds, undesirable weedy species. Other people, one key component of what people thought success was is erosion. Is there too much? Is there too little? Also site edges, and this is probably one of the bigger pain in the butt problems that on the site, especially if it's like right up against a street and there's somebody driving a truck or parking their car on it. Also exposed waste or low pH material within a site, within a reclaimed site, that's unacceptable. Bulk soil failure, which we don't see a lot of occurrence, but if it did, it's in the form or in the methodology. Also looking at barren areas and gullies. I'm going to touch briefly on these and kind of show some photos just so you understand what each one of these are. And if you have any questions, just stop me. So with each of these items that I was just going through those bullets, that if you have a score, you go into what we call a logic diagram. It says if it scores acceptable, you monitor in 4 more years. If it's unacceptable, whatever that value is, it has some pathway for getting to a corrective action plan or addressing that specific problem. So some presence of some evaluation parameters automatically initiate an action. For example, I was talking about is exposed waste. If you have exposed waste, unacceptable, it needs to be addressed. There's not a lot of discussion about it. And those are usually taken care of, not even the year after, but almost immediately. And so there's a logic diagram for each one of the parameters, with the exception of site edges. Site edges is kind of something that can evolve over time or change over time. So vegetative cover, this is ground cover, excuse me. You're looking at vegetative cover, litter, undesirable weedy species, noxious weed species, and rocks. And if a site was all noxious weeds, excuse me, that would not get any points. That would be bad. And so noxious weeds don't add to your ground cover at the site. Undesirable weedy species, there's a ton of cheatgrass on this hill, and this probably, talking with Robert and other professionals in the industry, there's reasons why those species are coming in, and the science and research is telling us it's the weed, it's the seed mix. So there's a lot of discussion right now on working with all the hard work that Tech's been doing in the different programs, and trying to figure out what the best path forward is for perpetuity going forward. Other things is rocks. A lot of the sites in the early 80s up until about the mid 90s maybe didn't have the best, or they had too much rock, so it becomes like a moonscape. So there may not be anything growing on, even weeds, but it may not necessarily be acceptable in this day and age for being within our community and meet the end land use. So it is okay to have some rock. It holds the cover in place, but it's one of the evaluation parameters. But really, in the end, it comes up with live desirable percentages which drives the decisions. And if you have low cover, you could go to the logic diagram here. If you have low cover between the 0 and 20%, you have to come up with a plan, or that's the suggestion. The management group would bless that, and then you perform that work. If you're in the 21 to 40% cover at a site, you ask yourself another question: do undesirable weedy species take up 10%? And if the answer is yes, you can move into a VI or do some not opportunistic, but just you might want to throw some fertilizers. You might want to look at a different type of interseeding, maybe more seed, maybe more mulch, to come up with a plan to hopefully boost the cover into this 41 to 100%. And one thing I think over the next 10 years we're going to have to look closely at are these numbers the right numbers, and what is acceptable going in the future. So erosion, I was really surprised. We went to a bunch of sites, and it seems like the erosion on a site-wide basis is not necessarily a huge problem. Erosion is mostly a problem the year or two years after the initial reclamation, before there's a healthy stand of vegetation. What the BRIS program uses is a modified Bureau of Land Management erosion system, and it takes a look at surface litter, rock movement, pedestaling of vegetation. It's kind of like where it's just growing on top of itself because it doesn't want to grow outward. Flow patterns of water through the vegetation, the depth and frequencies of gullies and rills. Rills are essentially a baby gully, less than 6 inches, and a gully is greater than 6 inches deep. It's basically an incised channel. One thing to note here is gullies, sometimes the year one after reclamation, you get a big rainstorm, erodes, but then the vegetation grows, and it's kind of a healing gully. It's not continuously eroding. It's improved. It's on its own. Just needed to get vegetation established. And then also the movement of surface soils. And if I could just, I'm just taking that stab, but I think maybe 5% of the sites have an erosion problem. Lots of times, once it erodes, I think you'll see some rock movement, but it's not getting worse. I'm not saying that it doesn't have vegetation, but we don't have massive erosion problems like this picture here, out of Anaconda years back. So, 5 minutes? 10 minutes, okay. So, this one, it's erosion. If you have a problem, fix it. If not, and usually erosion problem has an engineering solution, meaning that there might be run-on from above that could be dissipated or better spread out on the site instead of being channelized. It may be a street's running right into it, and it's just exiting, the water's just concentrating in one spot. Site edges, this is Trevona, and this has been fixed. This is just a historic photo, Iron Studer over here. This was where they feathered out the cover soil onto the kind of the waste that was regraded. And you can see there's a transition here. They probably were working up against a fence line or a right-of-way. And this is just an example. Also here, this looks like a steep slope break, parrot slope, been addressed. But these are the types of things that we monitor. But once another trigger item or evaluation procedure triggers it can also be addressed. So there's no logic diagram for this. It's just, hey, let's monitor this spot. Exposed waste. The only reason I included this photo, this is not a site which has been addressed, but it just shows the different color. This was waste. If you have something like this, you would have to address it. And the way the team does it is sometimes they can use a pH indicator solution that says, hey, this is low pH material. Okay, here it is. Circle it on the iPad. The team will come out and address it, cover it up, feather it into the existing landscape. So if you have a problem, you address it. These are extreme examples. This is not in Butte, clearly. This is bulk soil failure. It's kind of little ripples. We've seen it a few times. More failure that we're seeing is that maybe around an edge of near a retaining wall or a collapsed shaft or the concrete covers of a shaft. So if we see something like that, there would be definitely, hey, let's draw some attention to this site and address it. Barren areas. This is 75 square feet. If we see something that has no vegetation or less than 10% vegetation in a 75 square foot area, it needs to be addressed. And what happens there is you don't want to be mistaken if it's a rock outcrop, because that was never going to grow vegetation anyways. But if it's a situation like this where it needs to be addressed, they may do some pH indicator solution. Lots of times they'll figure out, hey, this is not contaminated, just wasn't seeded, or there was a car on blocks that was parked out there for 5 years, or it's just something during construction didn't work. So we go out, import soil, can be up to a foot, feathered in, and revegetate and monitor it. So 75 square feet is not that big, but that's kind of the threshold of saying, hey, that's a problem, that's unacceptable.
I just want to clarify something. So cover the barren areas, feather it in. When it's mine waste, you remove the mine waste, bring it to the repository, remove it down to the thickness of whatever the cap is, and replace with clean material.
That's right, and that's a good. So if this was mined waste, it would be categorized probably as a mined waste and a barren area. So it can get one or the other. It can get both also. Logic diagram. If you have barren areas, you need to go through the logic. One thing here is that if there's a barren area that's greater than 25% of the site, so if you have less than 10% vegetation growing in a area that's pretty big, you got to take a step back and look at the entire site. So there's also some additional triggers there. So Gullies, I touch base real quick on theirs. You got healing gullies. Neither of these are healing. This one's not really actively eroding, but this is a actively eroding gully which no longer exists. Logic diagram. Is it hot in here or is it just me? Okay. All right. I didn't know if it was this battery pack cooking my body. So logic diagram. If there's one, you address it. Last time it's an engineering solution, redistributing the water, upgrading from concentrating. So those are the evaluation procedures. Just wanted just a couple bullets here on what the training involves for the BRIS program. Like I said earlier, there's phenomenal evaluators right now. They get out there and spend some time out there calibrating their eye to make vegetation or ground cover estimates. They learn how to or practice or learn how to look at the Bureau of Land Management erosion parameters so that they can make good reproducible data collection activities. They visit a variety of sites just to make sure they get a good idea of all the different types of areas of reclamation, and then they learn how to fill out the BRIS field form, which is now on the iPad. So it's the more years, I think we have people now in their 5th or 6th year returning to the program. They're hot shots. They understand it. They get it. They're able to go pretty quick and produce reproducible data. So, this program has evolved, and this is where we're saving money. Once upon a time, we used field forms. That was great, easy. We've done it for years. We also used digital logbooks, which lasted about a half a season. That didn't work. And now they're into the iPads, and that's saving time, money for getting the data turned around faster. Instead of entering on a field form, then going and enter it in the computer, it's all just kind of one step right now. And now there's spatial information with that, so that really saves GIS time, but just becoming more efficient. So there's always places to improve. So, like I said, the field forms, the site had three polygons. Basically, we used to use field forms, come up here. Here's some areas that are a problem. B equals, this is polygon B, number 6 on the field form, which would have been number 6. This is a barren area. So that would evolve into a map that would have been part of the recommendations report. And eventually, this is old stuff now. Now it comes in more of a geodatabase instead of an individual form, but it comes up with some ideas on how to actually do the corrective action at the site. So the technical teams that perform, I'm not sure if it's high school students. Like I said, it was repeat field team members, but CFWEP is an integral part of the program. They're the ones hired through BSB to help implement the program, and they're able to accomplish a quarter of the sites probably in a week and a half time frame. They kind of divide and conquer at each of the sites, come up with data to hurry it into the database and through the process. So this last slide, summary of the BRIS. So it's applied in the field. It's been calibrated and validated. There's a pretty extensive document that talked about why this could work, which probably could evolve also. Meets the EPA's goals of being a cost-effective, reproducible methodology to look at these sites. Is developed with input and consensus of the stakeholders and provides the protectiveness and long-term integrity of the cover soil caps. And that's what we got.
It seems to me the BRIS program is a methodology, it's not a program. What's the turnaround time between a problem being identified with one of the caps and the problem getting fixed? And part of that question too is this evaluation every 4 years, is that enough? Or is the time waiting 4 years to evaluate a cap too long? But my main question is, BRIS doesn't fix anything. When a problem is identified, how long does it take to get it fixed?
Sure. You know, and we're working on making that more efficient, right? So ideally, you're looking at, let's go evaluate in the spring. Let's get a summary report to the agencies. Let's get boots on the ground with the technical management, you know, midsummer, and let's get the work done, you know, within a season. So that's ideal, John. You know, it's and then to answer your question about every 4 years, yes, it is. It is, but you know, maybe some of these sites that are failing 2 times in a row, you know, we have it all in the tool, in the system, that it fails twice. We need to take a harder look at that. We need a design. We need to bring the experts in. So I think it's the 4-year cycle is sufficient, and the additional redundancy and checks we have is also sufficient.
Yeah, it's a 1-year cycle. So
What
once
percentage of sites need remedial action? In other words, what's the failure rate for the caps now in Butte?
Absolutely. You know, right at the beginning, there was a lot of years where they hadn't been addressed, but now we saw a higher occurrence, and I have not run the math, so I don't know I don't even know about a lot. A lot of sites had polygons or sites had to be addressed, but they've been through 2 cycles of the BRIS program. They've been addressed. So now the time spent out in the field is becoming much less because we actually have a program that it's pretty rapid. It's 1-year turnaround. And you think about when we get out there in the summertime, then you write the report, then it snows. Then you plan, then you get out there and do the actual work. Then there's a 2-year rest period, because if the vegetation hasn't grown, hasn't propagated at that point, you give 2 years to prove up, and then that's report, and then you're coming back around.
And I just, you know, to clarify, you know, the definition of failure of a cap, to me it's not a failure. It still contains the integrity of controlling that exposure pathway. So the vegetation, we're really trying to control the sediment, the cap itself from eroding into the stormwater system. Now you got to imagine there's still that 18 inches of clean material. So if we're talking about a 6-inch erosion, we're not talking about a failure of the cap as far as it's connected to exposure to any kind of contaminants. Yes, sir.
Do you have on the website or somewhere where you can see what projects you're working every year, what areas of remediation? So I guess we're
Sure.
lower to what is.
Absolutely. I think that's a great suggestion. I don't have that right now. What we
I guess
do.
the only answer I'm looking for
Absolutely.
is yes or no.
Oh yeah, there is.
Okay.
There could be produced. So the site is broken up to what we call quadrants. There's 4 areas, 4 units that are approximately equal in size. They're addressed, and then now we receive a database that's like a live database where you can just scroll around on your computer and look at the whole site.
See what's-
But I do see value of coming up with something like, hey, here are the sites, you know.
Okay.
So
And then another question is, what's going on in the Lexington line? I'm up in that area. Just curious.
Yeah, they're doing some maintenance and reclamation. You know,
Okay.
they're controlling some water. They're that approach there and putting in a retaining wall, pretty extensive retaining wall. So there's a lot of different odds and ends they're doing there to make it safe. You know, Montana Bureau of Mines and Geology actually go in there and do a lot of do some well or some sampling through the shaft. And so they're fixing the fence and, you know, working with the Walker community on that as well.
that's within the mine yard.
Right.
Right. It's not. Well, I think we showed a picture of it earlier.
Yeah.
It doesn't involve the vegetated cover soil path.
No, one more final thing. What I liked, I heard was that evidently you've been working, communicating with BLM. I know 30 years ago in eastern Montana, they had a Bell jet flying around there looking at vegetation erosion. So they've done I think they've got a pretty good lessons learned database there. So that was kind of nice to hear that you were communicating.
You know, we communicated during the development. They helped us. We had some ties to the BLM and some soil scientists. They are not a regulatory agency for this project, but they did an interagency, just communication between the DEQ or cooperative agreement to learn what their lessons learned were for some large sites.
Okay, good.
Well, it seems to me that what BRES does is give a number, a numerical and statistical number, to a subjective personal evaluation of the site. And you have all these different people doing it. How can the agency claim that there's any kind of standardization of impressions? Because you're not using any kind of quantifiable measure of what's coming off the cap or anything. It's all visual. I see this, I see that. You have high school students or college students or whatever. How can EPA maintain that this produces any kind of standardized evaluation?
So, trained, reproducible data. So the trainee can reproduce the data. So the methodology is reproducible, and so the numbers should be reproducible,
Absolutely.
right?
So this is a modified point intercept. It's kind of a quick way to measure and calibrate the person's eye for making vegetation measurements. And with that said, if I go back to the logic diagram for cover, you're trying to lump it into 0 to 20, 21, and 41 to 100%. You get the same thing happens whether it's 5% or 15%. If you put it into this category, which is not hard to do, throw it into one of the 3 buckets, and then you calibrate your eye for vegetation based on making measurements. For the erosion, those are actually measurements that you physically make with a ruler, with counting. Those things can be reproduced. So there is some ways to do a quality control check. And for every 10% of each of the sites that they visit, that the field team visits, they do a quality check. If their quality check doesn't meet it, they have to go back and reproduce from that week. And usually 10 sites a week, or 10 polygons. You have a check, you see if you're within line, and that's what you can do. So it is reproducible. So you do.
Who does the check?
We do self-checking, and then we also have oversight. For instance, I'll come out and observe the checking I'll tag along with the team. They will do a check, they produce their data, and you're throwing it into one of 3 buckets. Those buckets are not that difficult to do.
Let me answer some of this for Tom. There's been years of ecological sampling devices developed, and you'd be amazed at what you can do with something like this with reproducibility. People that have never looked at a plant before. You train them, and then you go back to the same area and have your different crew come through, and you all come up with almost identical results.
And that's been verified.
I mean, Dobbin Myers, a good old-time plant ecologist, and he tested this, and I think he worked with the BLM too. But in the Arctic one time, we were able to, we had more classifications than this, we had 5. Within it was for a pipeline, above and below, within 1 year, we were able to determine 1% change in vegetation, but we did on a whole bunch of it. So it doesn't look like it's really objective, but it's trained properly, different people come up with the same results. It's not just, I think this is such and such, they end up being calibrated.
When I look at this ground cover logic diagram right here, I'm trying to get my arms around how to interpret this. So it appears that if you have between 21 and 40% of lot cover
Yes.
on a particular site, And if the weeds haven't consumed more than 20% of that site, then it gets passed. We'll get it again in 4 years. Am I reading that right?
Absolutely, but that's with assumption that this is good, bad, ugly, or good, bad, ugly. This is not all that bad. This is not bad. This is a good site. So this is that kind of, it could go one way, it could go the other, but it's still performing. There's not a lot of movement. There's vegetation is growing. It's going through that cycle. We see this a lot on some of the older reclamation. This doesn't mean it's failed. This is where you get worried. This is where you can do some enhancements or some, I'm missing, the word's not coming out. You can do something here to make sure it doesn't slip down. You can catch it here, and if you can push it up to here, it would be more sustainable. So this is not middle, meaning bad. This is just that, okay, you're on notice, we're gonna watch you. We're gonna observe you every 4 years, and we're gonna keep a close eye on you.
Well, you know, when we look at stormwater being a concern in the community, having, let's say, 25%
Right.
cover on a site, that suggests to me that that could be a source of contamination.
Absolutely. If that contaminated material was the waste on the surface, this is clean material on the top. However, some of these sites have like that. The early 80s had more of a rocky soil, maybe a decomposed granite with Idaho fescue growing everywhere. It's not really moving. There's not a lot of soil movement, or if it did happen, it's gone, and it's a stable site.
Or it could be, just the litter. And it fell between the 21 and 40, and you go out and you put boots on the ground, and the recommendation comes back, from Butte Silverbow, EPA and DEQ go out, confirm it, or, decide if we agree with the recommendation, and then maybe that recommendation is to rake that litter out, put some more seed in because it didn't, it fell within the 21 to 40.
And there's a little asterisk that I cut it off, I apologize, but this is like a one or two time deal. It can go from here to down there. If it does, it's got to get, it can't just go right here every time. And this is not a normal pathway. So basically, if you hit this cover class twice, you're going down to vegetation improvement. And I apologize, it's not, there was a note, this was cut, out of a PDF, I didn't get it here, but there's an asterisk that should be right here. It says, you can't go down this pathway for too long. Eventually you do have to do vegetation improvement. And then normally it falls right back into the, where do you want to?
How much room is there in the system to make it smarter, to improve it, to add in data? What do you think that's kind of a thing?
Absolutely. And the goal is to make sure in the end that the human health environment is protected.
Yeah, Julia gave a really good talk on
Absolutely.
about
Optimization.
breeze evaluation, and then I just think maybe then it even came out that mosses and lichens play a really important role, and sometimes they just consider bare ground, although they're doing so much. And I think when we were out together in the summer, we talked about that if they are there, we just think of vascular plants that there can do services.
Absolutely. And that's really good to point out is that once you get to this vegetation improvement plan, you can have a no action or acknowledge it. It just means you have to have a plan. You have to identify those types of things. It doesn't necessarily mean you just go throw fertilizer. You don't go throw fertilizer. More of this, more of that. You come up with a plan to understand what's going to site. This triggers somebody to come out there, maybe a one step higher professional, somebody who's more specialized in that specific issue, to go do boots on the ground. That's the field evaluators collect the initial data, bring it back. It's evaluated. If it's necessary to go to the next level, that's where you push it off. So having this doesn't mean go do fertilizer, It means coming up with a holistic plan that's sustainable for the long term. Julie had her hand up, I do know.
I did want to note that typically if our team, the cruise it, you sort of see a 21 to 40% live cover. We confirm with Robert how, and we go out and look and see why that cover is not strong. Typically what it'll be is that the plant has shed its duff from the year before and it's laying on the ground, it's dead. The new plant is growing out of that. And so we'll rake that up and the crews will go in and put in fresh soil and they will reseed so that as the water comes in the spring, it starts to revegetate. But Robert's been really helping us with understanding also our native plant species and some of the issues that maybe the species are playing on the site. So it's not necessarily an erosion issue or that there's a problem with the site cover. It's that we're learning, 20 years after we first planted these plants that maybe Eurasian grasses may have an impact on this and how do we recalibrate from that as well. So typically if you sort of go anything between 0 and 40%, all sites will get an evaluation from a management level as well.
That sounds good, that's not quite what that says.
Yeah, I agree.
I apologize, that's my fault for not having that right there first. You do start to see trends at site too. So you see, this site was built the same year, it's across the street, it's same equipment, same soil, same seed mix. You can kind of start drawing the dots, like maybe if we applied that lesson learned from over there, that would work.
How long will this program last?
Forever.
Forever? What?
Absolutely. I
Is
don't
that the
know.
way it's planned now? Interesting.
It's good.
Yes.
Are you evaluating let's say piloting more high-tech approaches to this? A lot of work has been done with imagery and looking for changes on images, which can be automated.
Absolutely.
And I realize you're probably early in the cycle and you obviously need ground truth to prove that your imaging work is working.
Right.
But it has the potential to allow you to intervene more quickly when it's necessary, because of course the environment isn't the same every month, 10 years in a row. And June 30th, 10 years in a row, it's not going to be the same. So
Absolutely.
you need to be flexible with what nature dishes you.
So the company I'm working for is doing a pilot we're doing a test project over in the Bunker Hill mine, Second Coeur d'Alene. We're using drone technology with infrared. So you could try it, run a drone instead of getting satellite imagery that you download that doesn't have the right resolution. We're trying to see if we can get something that's only 5 or 6 feet off the ground that can go do plots, can do pictures, but they're looking at hundreds of acres. There's definitely technological advancements, like for instance using the iPad, huge. That's where we're at right now. And if something were to come along, some disruptive technology that would help us, it'd be a silver bullet, save time, save resources. Nikkia would be controlling it from his office up in Helena. He would do it.
I'm not allowed to use drones.
So, yeah. But I think those are. As a scientist or in the science community, yeah, we're always looking for
Absolutely, and I
things
think
like that. Innovation.
And I haven't talked to Julie about this yet, but I know that Atlantic Richfield is looking into that technology right now, and maybe even has something to do to get within that 3 centimeter resolution with a drone to maybe evaluate sites. So there you go.
It's my understanding that the Butte Anacon and Pacific Railroad was removed and capped as an emergency action. And there's a number of places along it where it's very clear that IPH water is still in appearance at the surface. Is that is there a way to find out if that's on a specific sites or not on anybody's radar?
Sure, and that would be valuable feedback that I would like to know, the areas you're talking about, so I can confirm what's going on there. So I'm always looking for that kind of input, and you know, do my homework to make sure I'm, you know, for one, that it's not affecting the creek or human health, and then two, you know, go back and actually dig into, did we clean this area? Is it a part of a B-res site? Is it a part of the trail? And why are we seeing, you know, high pH runoff going?
There's one spot within a block here where there's a big bare spot on a vacant lot, and it's got copper stained pebbles and chunks of iron pyrite that you can pick up off the surface, and it's been that way ever since the trail
Sure.
was built.
Sure.
Well, I think Tom's really
Sorry.
working against us, so thank you so much again, and it's great to see you.